The train wheezed to a stop at Bridle Pass Station, spitting black smoke into the endless blue sky. Clara Whitmore stood on the platform, her leather boots firm against the weathered planks, watching the other passengers hurry away to waiting families and wagons. Nobody waited for her. She smoothed down her riding skirt forest green wool she'd sewn herself back in New York, practical enough for the frontier but still maintaining a hint of Eastern propriety. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and she could feel sweat gathering beneath her collar. Her trunk sat beside her, heavy with tools her mother had left her wood carving instruments, leather stamps, needles, and thread. Everything a woman might need to make her way in the world, if that woman was willing to work. The station master, a grizzled man with tobacco-stained teeth, approached her. "You waiting on someone, Miss—" "I'm expected at the Burke Ranch," Clara replied, keeping her voice steady despite the flutter of uncertainty in her chest. "Thomas Burke sent for me." The old man's eyebrows rose slightly, but he said nothing more, just pointed west. "About 5 miles that way. Road's decent enough if you got a ride." But Clara had no ride. Thomas had promised in his letters that someone would meet her at the station. She'd traveled 2,000 miles on that promise, leaving behind a life in New York that had become unbearable after Harold Pemberton had broken their engagement. "Too independent," he'd said. "No man wants a wife who speaks her mind at every turn." Well, Thomas Burke had seemed different in his letters. He'd written of needing a strong woman, someone who could handle the harsh realities of ranch life. Clara had responded with honesty about her skills and her character, and he'd sent her train fare with an invitation to come west. Now she stood alone in a town that looked like it had been carved from the desert itself. Wooden buildings lined the main street, their facades bleached pale by the sun. A few horses stood tied to hitching posts, their tails swishing at flies. The air smelled of dust and leather and something else sage. Maybe, or some other wild plant she didn't recognize. Clara hired a boy with a cart to take her trunk to the hotel. She'd walk to the Burke Ranch herself if need be, but she couldn't carry her possessions 5 miles in this heat. The hotel was a 2-story building that had seen better days. The proprietress, Mrs. Elmira Hutchins, was a thin woman with sharp eyes that took in Clara's Eastern clothes and sun-flushed face. $2 a night, paid in advance, she said. "That includes supper, but not breakfast." Clara paid for 1 night, hoping she wouldn't need more. Surely Thomas had simply been delayed. Ranch work didn't always accommodate train schedules. Her room was small but clean, with a narrow bed and a washstand. Clara poured water from the pitcher and splashed her face, then changed into a fresh shirtwaist. She repinned her dark hair, which had come loose during the long journey, and studied herself in the small mirror above the washstand. 27 years old, and starting over again. Her face had always been too strong-featured for conventional beauty, her jaw too square, her cheekbones too prominent. The sun had already started to darken her complexion despite her bonnet, but her gray eyes were clear and determined, and her shoulders were straight. She'd come too far to doubt herself now. Clara asked Mrs. Hutchins for directions to the Burke Ranch and set out on foot. The road was indeed decent, hard-packed dirt that didn't kick up too much dust. She walked steadily, grateful for the practical boots she'd chosen over more fashionable options. Jackrabbits scattered at her approach, and once she saw a hawk circling high overhead. The ranch, when she finally reached it, was impressive. A large main house with a wraparound porch, several outbuildings, and corrals full of cattle. Men worked around the property, but none paid her any attention as she approached the front door. Thomas Burke answered her knock himself. He was younger than she'd imagined from his letters, perhaps 35, with sandy hair and a weak chin partially hidden by a mustache. His eyes widened when he saw her. "Miss Whitmore." "Mr. Burke." She extended her hand, which he took briefly, his grip limp. "I apologize for arriving unannounced. I waited at the station, but when no one came—" You're different than I pictured, he interrupted, his gaze traveling from her travel-dusty boots to her determined face. Different how? Clara kept her tone pleasant, though warning bells had started to chime in her mind. Thomas shifted uncomfortably. Well, that is, I expected someone more. He gestured vaguely. Delicate, refined. You're rather tall. Clara was indeed 5 feet 8 inches, taller than many men. She'd never considered it a failing before. I assure you, Mr. Burke, my height doesn't prevent me from cooking, sewing, or managing a household, as I mentioned in my letters. I'm quite capable. Yes, well, he wouldn't meet her eyes. The thing is, Miss Whitmore, I've been reconsidering. A ranch like mine needs a certain kind of woman. Someone who'll know her place. You seem like you might have opinions about how things should be run. Most people have opinions, Mr. Burke. I've simply been taught not to hide mine. Exactly. He said it like she'd proven his point. I'm sorry you've come all this way, but I don't think this arrangement will work after all. Clara stood very still, feeling the ground shift beneath her feet though the porch boards were solid. You're refusing me because I'm tall and might have opinions. It's not suitable, he said firmly. I'll reimburse your train fare, of course. Keep your money. Clara's voice came out harder than she intended. I wouldn't want to be accused of taking charity from a man who invites a woman 2,000 miles only to reject her for having a backbone. She turned and walked away, her spine rigid, her steps measured. She would not run. She would not let him see how his words had cut through her carefully maintained composure. Behind her, she heard his door close with a definitive click. The walk back to town seemed longer. The sun had started its descent, painting the desert in shades of gold and orange. Clara's feet hurt, and her throat was dry, but she kept walking. What choice did she have? She'd spent most of her savings on clothes and supplies for her new life. The train fare Thomas had sent wouldn't get her back to New York, and even if it could, what waited for her there? Whispers and pitying looks from people who'd already deemed her a failure once. No, she'd figure something out. She always had. The wind picked up as she neared town, sending dust devils spinning across the road. Red dirt clung to her skirt hem, and she could taste grit between her teeth. This land was nothing like New York with its paved streets and gaslight. Here, the earth itself seemed to test you, to demand proof that you deserved to stay. Clara lifted her chin. She'd provide that proof, somehow. By the time she reached the hotel, the sun sat low on the horizon, and her shadow stretched long behind her. Tomorrow she'd have to make decisions, look for work, perhaps, or find a cheaper place to stay. Tonight, she just needed to rest and gather her strength for whatever came next. She didn't cry that night, though tears pressed behind her eyes. Instead, she sat at the small writing desk in her room and wrote a letter to her mother, dead these 5 years. Dearest Mama, she wrote, I have arrived in the West, and already it has shown me its teeth. But you taught me to bite back when necessary, and I haven't forgotten. The man who sent for me proved himself a coward, but perhaps that's a blessing. Better to know it now than after saying vows. I don't know what tomorrow will bring, but I'm still standing. That has to count for something. Your loving daughter, Clara. She folded the letter carefully and placed it under her pillow. As was her habit, someday, perhaps, she'd stop writing to ghosts. But not tonight. Tonight, she needed to believe that somewhere, somehow, her mother's spirit could hear her and send her strength for the journey ahead. The morning brought no better prospects. Clara counted her remaining money over breakfast at the small cafe next to the hotel, $17.30. Enough for perhaps a week at the hotel if she ate sparingly. After that, she'd be truly desperate. She spent the morning walking through Bridle Pass, inquiring at every establishment that might need help. The general store had no need for another clerk. The restaurant was fully staffed. The seamstress already had an apprentice. By noon, Clara's feet ached and her spirits had sunk lower than the desert valley surrounding the town. She was returning to the hotel when she encountered Thomas Burke outside the bank. He had the grace to look uncomfortable, fumbling with his hat. "Miss Whitmore, I wanted to give you this." He held out an envelope. "The train fare, as promised." Clara looked at the envelope but didn't take it. "I told you yesterday, Mr. Burke, I don't want your money." "Don't be stubborn," he said, irritation creeping into his voice. "You need to get back home." "Home?" Clara laughed, a sound without humor. "New York hasn't been home for a long time, and I didn't come west to run back at the first difficulty." "This isn't the place for a woman like you," Thomas insisted. "You're too tall, too opinionated, too unwilling to shrink myself to fit your expectations." Clara stepped closer, and he actually backed away. "You're right about one thing, Mr. Burke. I'm not the woman for you. I pity the one who is—" She left him standing there, envelope still extended, and continued toward the hotel. But as she walked, she noticed people watching her. The confrontation hadn't gone unnoticed. In a town this small, word would spread quickly. The difficult Eastern woman who'd been rejected by Thomas Burke. It would make finding work even harder. Lost in thought, Clara barely noticed the changing weather until the first fat raindrops hit her face. The sky, clear just moments ago, had darkened with surprising speed. Desert storms, she'd learn later, came fast and fierce. Within minutes, the rain was falling in sheets. Clara hurried toward the hotel, but she was still 2 blocks away when the downpour became torrential. Water ran in rivers down the street, turning the packed dirt to mud. Her skirts grew heavy, dragging at her steps. She could barely see through the curtain of rain. A horse and rider materialized out of the storm, pulling up beside her. The man swung down in one fluid motion, water streaming from his silver belly hat. "Ma'am, you need to get out of this weather." His voice was deep, carrying easily over the sound of the rain. Clara looked up at him, and up. He was tall, perhaps 6'3", with broad shoulders beneath his duster. Water droplets caught in his dark beard, and his eyes were the color of winter sky. "The hotel," she started. "Too far in this mess. Come on." Without waiting for permission, he took her elbow and guided her toward a nearby building. His touch was firm but gentle, and Clara found herself moving with him despite her usual instinctive resistance to being handled. The building turned out to be a boarding house. The man pushed open the door and ushered her inside, where the sudden cessation of rain felt almost shocking. "Wyatt Langston," the proprietress exclaimed, hurrying forward. "What on earth, oh my, dear, you're soaked through." "Found her trying to swim down Main Street," the man Wyatt said. "This is Mrs. Nettie Carmichael. Nettie, this young lady needs to get dry before she catches her death." Mrs. Carmichael, a plump woman in her 50s with kind eyes and graying hair, immediately took charge. "Of course. Come along, dear. We'll get you sorted out." Clara found herself whisked upstairs to a warm room where Mrs. Carmichael provided towels and a dry dress that was too short but otherwise fit reasonably well. "This was my daughter's," Mrs. Carmichael explained as Clara changed behind a screen. "She's married now, living in California, left some things behind." "You're very kind," Clara said, emerging in the borrowed dress. "I'm Clara Whitmore. I just arrived yesterday from New York." "Ah, you're the one Thomas Burke sent for." Mrs. Carmichael's expression suggested she knew the whole story already. That man never did have the sense God gave a goose, advertising for a strong woman when what he wants is a doormat. Despite her low spirits, Clara found herself almost smiling. "That's an apt description." They returned downstairs to find Wyatt Langston standing by the window, watching the rain. He'd removed his hat and duster, revealing dark hair that needed cutting and clothes that, while clean, showed the wear of hard use. When he turned at their approach, Clara noticed a thin scar running along his left jaw. "Better?" he asked. "Much, thank you, Mr. Langston." "Mrs. Carmichael supplied. "Wyatt Langston. He manages the horse ranch north of town." Wyatt nodded, but offered nothing more. He wasn't unfriendly, exactly, just contained, like a man who'd learned to keep his words close. Mrs. Carmichael served tea, and they sat in her parlor while the storm raged outside. Clara learned that Mrs. Carmichael had been widowed 3 years ago when her husband died in a mining accident. She'd turned their home into a boarding house to make ends meet. "I also take in sewing and mending," she said, though my eyes aren't what they were. "I sew," Clara offered. "Quite well. Actually, my mother taught me, and I've kept in practice." "Mrs. Carmichael's eyes lit up. "Do you now? Well, that's interesting." Wyatt said little during the conversation, but Clara felt his gaze on her. Not in the leering way some men looked, but with a quiet assessment, as if he were trying to figure something out. The rain finally stopped after an hour, leaving the air fresh and cool. Clara rose to leave. "I should return to the hotel. Thank you again for your kindness." "Nonsense." "Mrs. Carmichael said firmly, "You'll stay for supper. It's the least I can offer after you've been through such an ordeal." Clara wanted to refuse. She hated feeling like a charity case, but the older woman's expression brooked no argument. And truthfully, a home-cooked meal sounded wonderful after yesterday's travel food and this morning's meager breakfast. Wyatt stood as well. "I'll be heading out. Got horses to tend." He retrieved his hat and duster, then paused at the door. For a moment, he looked like he might say something more, but then he simply touched his hat brim and was gone. "Don't mind Wyatt," Mrs. Carmichael said, noticing Clara watching him leave. "He's not much for conversation since, well, it's not my story to tell, but he's a good man. The best, really, just carries some hurt." Clara understood about carrying hurt. She'd brought her own across half a continent. Over supper, Mrs. Carmichael gently drew out more of Clara's story. Not just the humiliation with Thomas Burke, but the broken engagement back east, the death of her parents, the gradual realization that the life she'd been raised for marriage to a respectable man. Children. Managing a household might not happen, at least not in the conventional way. "So I answered Mr. Burke's advertisement," Clara finished. "I thought the frontier might have room for a woman who doesn't quite fit the mold." "Oh, my dear," Mrs. Carmichael said softly, "the frontier has room for all kinds of women. It's just that some men, even out here, can't see past their own narrow ideas." After supper, Clara helped with the dishes despite Mrs. Carmichael's protests. As they worked, an idea formed. "Mrs. Carmichael, you mentioned you take in sewing, but your eyes trouble you. What if I helped? I could do the fine work, and we could split the payment." The older woman's hands stilled in the soapy water. "You'd want to do that?" "I need work," Clara said honestly. "And you've been kind to me. It seems like an arrangement that could benefit us both." "But where would you stay? The hotel's expensive for any length of time." Clara's spirits sank. She'd momentarily forgotten that problem. Mrs. Carmichael dried her hands slowly, thinking, "I have a room. It's small, just a converted storage space, really, but it's clean and dry. If you'd be willing to help with the household chores as well as the sewing." "Yes," Clara said quickly, hope blooming in her chest. "Yes, I'd be more than willing." And so, as the sun set on her second day in Bridle Pass, Clara found herself with a roof over her head and the promise of work. It wasn't what she'd expected when she'd stepped off that train, but perhaps that was fitting. Nothing about her life had gone according to plan. Why should this be different? That night, in the small but cozy room Mrs. Carmichael had shown her. Clara again wrote to her mother's memory. I met two kinds of people today. Mama, the kind who see what they expect to see, and the kind who simply see what is. I'm grateful for the latter. A Mrs. Carmichael has taken me in, and a man named Wyatt Langston pulled me from the storm. I don't know what tomorrow will bring, but tonight I'm dry and fed and not alone. Sometimes that's enough. Your loving daughter, Clara. She folded the letter and placed it under her pillow, then blew out the lamp. Through the window, stars had emerged, brilliant in the clear desert air. Tomorrow she'd retrieve her trunk from the hotel and begin this unexpected new chapter. The West hadn't welcomed her the way she'd hoped, but perhaps she could carve out a place for herself anyway. After all, she'd come too far to give up now. Clara woke before dawn, a habit formed during years of rising early to help her mother with housework. The small room, Mrs. Carmichael had given her was indeed modest, just space enough for a narrow bed, a washstand, and her trunk, but it was clean and private, more than many women in her position could claim. She dressed quietly and made her way downstairs, intending to start the fire in the kitchen stove. But Mrs. Carmichael was already there, kneading bread dough by lamplight. "Goodness, child, you're up early," the older woman said, not unkindly. "I thought I'd help with breakfast," Clara said. "If we're to be partners, I should pull my weight." "Mrs. Carmichael smiled. "I like your spirit. Very well. The coffee pot's on the shelf there. The boarders expect it strong enough to float a horseshoe." They worked companionably in the pre-dawn quiet. Clara learned that Mrs. Carmichael had 3 regular boarders: Mr. Eugene Patterson, a bank clerk; Mr. Josiah Mills, who worked at the telegraph office; and young Timothy Shaw, barely 18, who swept out the saloon and harbored dreams of becoming a cattle baron. "They're good men, all of them," Mrs. Carmichael said. "Quiet, pay on time, no trouble. That's all I ask." By the time the sun painted the kitchen windows gold, they had breakfast-ready flapjacks, bacon, biscuit, and that promised strong coffee. The boarders filed in one by one, nodding politely to Clara as Mrs. Carmichael introduced her as her new sewing assistant. After breakfast, Clara helped clear the dishes, then accompanied Mrs. Carmichael to the small room that served as her sewing parlor. Fabric pieces, half-finished garments, and spools of thread covered every surface. "Lord have mercy, I've let it get away from me," Mrs. Carmichael sighed. "My eyes just can't manage the fine work anymore, and customers have been patient, but—" Clara surveyed the chaos with a practical eye. "We'll need to organize first. May I?" With Mrs. Carmichael's blessing, Clara spent the morning creating order from disorder. She sorted projects by customer, organized thread by color, and set up a system for tracking what needed to be done. Her mother had run their household with similar efficiency, and Clara had learned well. "This is Mrs. Morrison's dress," Mrs. Carmichael explained, holding up a blue calico that needed hemming. "And here's a shirt for Mr. Garrett, torn at the shoulder. Oh, and these curtains belong to Mrs. Price at the Mercantile." Clara examined each piece, mentally cataloging the work required. It was substantial but not overwhelming. She could do this. She was threading a needle to begin Mrs. Morrison's hem when they heard horses outside. Through the window, Clara glimpsed Wyatt Langston dismounting, a burlap sack in one hand. "Mrs. Carmichael hurried to the door. "Wyatt, twice in 2 days will wonders never cease." He removed his hat as he entered, his dark hair slightly flattened. His eyes found Clara immediately, then shifted away. "Brought those shirts we talked about," he said, offering the sack to Mrs. Carmichael. "The boys at the ranch are hard on their clothes. Oh yes, I remember now." Mrs. Carmichael opened the sack and pulled out several work shirts, all showing significant wear. "Goodness, what do they do?" Wrestle bears. A slight smile tugged at Wyatt's mouth. Horses, mostly, but the result's about the same. Clara set down her sewing and came to look. The shirts were indeed in poor condition, ripped seams, missing buttons, one with a tear nearly the length of the back. "These will take some doing." "Mrs." Carmichael said, then brightened. "But Clara here has clever hands. We'll have them right as rain in no time." Wyatt's gaze shifted to Clara again. "You're staying on, then?" "Yes, Mrs. Carmichael has been kind enough to offer me room and board in exchange for help with the sewing." He nodded slowly. "That's good. Nettie needs the help." "I can manage." "Mrs." Carmichael protested, but fondly. "Never said you couldn't." Wyatt replied, "Just saying it's good to have help." He reached into his pocket. "What do I owe you?" "Oh, we haven't even started." "For the work you'll do," he clarified. "I'd rather pay ahead." "Mrs." Carmichael named a price that seemed fair to Clara, and Wyatt paid without haggling. As he counted out the money, Clara noticed his hands scarred from rope burns, one finger slightly crooked as if it had been broken and poorly set. Working hands. Honest hands. "I'll send someone to collect them in a week," he said, settling his hat back on his head. "That enough time?" "Plenty," Clara said before Mrs. Carmichael could answer. She'd already mentally planned how to tackle the repairs. Wyatt paused at the door. Looking back, "You did right, not taking Burke's money," he said quietly. "Man's a fool." Then he was gone, leaving Clara slightly stunned. It was the most he'd said directly to her. "Well, Mrs." Carmichael said with satisfaction, "that's the most words I've heard Wyatt string together in months. You must have made an impression." Clara returned to her sewing, unsure how to respond. She'd noticed Wyatt, too. Of course, hard not to notice a man who moved with such quiet confidence, who helped strangers in storms without expecting thanks. But she'd come west to be independent, not to moon over another man who might find her too tall, too opinionated, too much. The rest of the day passed in comfortable rhythm. Clara hemmed Mrs. Morrison's dress and began work on the torn shirts while Mrs. Carmichael handled customers who stopped by. Word had already spread that Nettie Carmichael had taken on an assistant, and several women came to see for themselves. Some were merely curious, wanting to size up the Eastern woman who'd been rejected by Thomas Burke, but others seemed genuinely pleased to know their mending would be completed sooner. "I've been waiting 2 weeks for that quilt to be patched," Mrs. Davis, the schoolmarm, confided. "Not that I blame dear Nettie, but with school starting soon, I do need it." "It will be ready by Friday," Clara promised, making a note. That evening, after supper and chores, Clara sat in the parlor working by lamplight. The boarders had retired to their rooms, and Mrs. Carmichael dozed in her chair by the fire. The only sounds were the pop of burning wood and the whisper of thread through fabric. This wasn't the life Clara had imagined when she'd boarded the train in New York. She'd pictured herself as a ranch wife, managing a large household, perhaps raising children who'd grow up free and strong under the western sky. Instead, she was a boarding house seamstress, dependent on the charity of a kind widow. But as she worked, Clara found a measure of peace she hadn't felt in months. There was something satisfying about taking torn fabric and making it whole again, about creating neat stitches in orderly rows. Her mother had always said that needle and thread could fix more than just clothes, they could mend a troubled spirit too. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. It was late for callers. Past 9 o'clock. Mrs. Carmichael startled awake. "Who on earth?" Clara set down her sewing and went to the door. A small figure stood on the porch, a boy, perhaps 10 or 11, with a dirty face and clothes that barely held together. "Please, ma'am," he said, his voice trembling. "My sister's sick, and Ma sent me to fetch Mrs. Carmichael. She said Mrs. Carmichael would know what to do." "Mrs. Carmichael was already reaching for her shawl. That's the Hendricks boy. His family has a claim out past Willow Creek. How bad is she? Samuel. Real bad, ma'am. Burning up with fever. Clara grabbed her own shawl. I'm coming too. Clara, you don't need to. Another pair of hands might help. Clara said firmly. She'd nursed her mother through her final illness. She knew something about tending the sick. They hitched up Mrs. Carmichael's old buggy and set out into the night, young Samuel riding his mule alongside. The moon was nearly full, casting silver light across the desert landscape. The journey took nearly an hour over rough roads. The Hendricks claim was a modest affair, a small cabin, a garden plot, a few chickens. Mrs. Hendricks met them at the door, worry etched into her weathered face. Thank you for coming. It's Lucy. She's been poorly for 2 days, but tonight, she led them inside. The cabin was one room, divided by a hanging blanket. Behind it, a small girl lay on a narrow bed, her face flushed with fever. Clara immediately went to her, feeling her forehead. How old is she? 7, Mrs. Hendricks whispered. My baby. Mrs. Carmichael examined the child with a gentle expertise. Fever's high, but I don't see signs of anything worse. We need to cool her down. They worked through the night, taking turns bathing Lucy's face and arms with cool water, coaxing sips of willow bark tea between her cracked lips. Clara sang softly, songs her mother had sung to her, and slowly, the fever began to break. By dawn, Lucy was sleeping naturally, her breathing easy. Mrs. Hendricks wept with relief. I can't pay you much, she began, but Mrs. Carmichael waved her off. Neighbors help neighbors. That's how it's always been. As they rode back to town in the morning light, Clara asked, Do you often get called out like that? Now and then. I'm no doctor, but I've picked up a few things over the years. Folks know they can count on me in a pinch. You're remarkable, Clara said sincerely. Mrs. Carmichael smiled. We all do what we can with what we have. Speaking of which, you handled yourself well back there. Not many would lose a night's sleep for strangers. They were in need. Clara said simply, How could I not help? Back at the boarding house, exhausted but satisfied, Clara realized she'd experienced something profound. In New York, she'd lived surrounded by people but essentially alone. Here, after only days, she was already part of a community where neighbors helped neighbors, where a stranger's child was worth a sleepless night. That evening, she wrote to her mother, I'm beginning to understand this place. Mama, it's hard and unforgiving, but there's a honesty to it. People here are measured by their actions, not their appearances or social graces. I mended shirts today and helped save a child tonight. Both felt equally important. I think I might be able to make a life here after all. Your loving daughter, Clara. As she placed the letter under her pillow, Clara thought about Wyatt Langston's scarred hands and quiet strength, about Mrs. Carmichael's endless kindness, about little Lucy Hendricks sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms. The West hadn't given her what she'd expected, but perhaps it was giving her what she needed. The following Tuesday, Wyatt Langston returned for his mended shirts. Clara had just finished pressing the last one when she heard his familiar step on the porch. She'd learned to recognize it over the past week, steady, deliberate, never rushed. Afternoon, ladies, he said, removing his hat as he entered the sewing room. Mrs. Carmichael was out visiting Mrs. Price about new curtains, leaving Clara alone with the work. She retrieved the bundled shirts from the shelf, proud of her repairs. Each torn seam had been reinforced, every missing button replaced with careful attention to matching the others. These look better than when they were new, Wyatt said. Examining her work, his fingers traced one particularly extensive repair where she'd had to essentially reconstruct a sleeve. That one gave me some trouble, Clara admitted, but I think it'll hold now. What do I owe you? He reached for his pocket, but Clara shook her head. You paid in advance. Remember, though, Mrs. Carmichael did say to tell you she's added you to her regular mending schedule. If you're agreeable, every 2 weeks. That'd be fine. He folded the shirts carefully, then seemed to hesitate. You settling in all right? Yes, thank you. Everyone's been very welcoming. That wasn't entirely true. She'd noticed whispers and stares when she went to the mercantile, but Wyatt didn't need to know that. He shifted his weight, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. There's something else. The ranch. We've got more work than just mending. Curtains for the bunkhouse, new seat covers for the chuck wagon, bigger jobs. I wondered if if Mrs. Carmichael could spare you. You want me to come to the ranch? Clara tried to keep the surprise from her voice. Only if it's convenient. I'd pay fair wages, and someone would bring you back to town before dark. He met her eyes then, and Clara saw something in his expression she couldn't quite name. The men, they're respectful. You wouldn't have any trouble. It was unconventional, a single woman visiting a ranch full of men, but Clara had left conventional behind in New York. I'd need to discuss it with Mrs. Carmichael, she said carefully. Of course. He put on his hat, then paused at the door. It's good work you do, Miss Whitmore. Careful, precise, like you take pride in making things right. Before Clara could respond, he was gone, leaving her staring at the empty doorway. Compliments from Wyatt Langston seemed to be as rare as desert rain, and just as unexpected when they came. Mrs. Carmichael returned an hour later, flushed with success from negotiating a good price for the curtain work. Wyatt Langston wants me to do some work at his ranch, Clara told her, explaining his proposition. The older woman's eyebrows rose. Well, that's interesting. Wyatt hasn't had anyone out to the ranch since... She trailed off, then shook her head. It's a good opportunity. The Langston Ranch is successful. They pay well. But would it be proper, my reputation? Pish, Mrs. Carmichael waved a hand. This isn't New York society. Dear, out here, work is work. Besides, Wyatt's word is gold in this town. If he says you'll be safe, you will be. So it was arranged. That Thursday, Clara found herself in a wagon beside a taciturn ranch hand named Hank, bouncing along the road north of town. The landscape opened up as they traveled, sagebrush giving way to grassland dotted with juniper and pinon pine. The Langston Ranch sprawled across a valley between 2 ridges, bigger than Clara had expected. A main house sat apart from the working building's barn. Bunkhouse, various sheds and corrals. Horses grazed in the nearest pasture, their coats gleaming in the morning sun. Boss is likely at the breaking pen, Hank said, the first words he'd spoken since town. Clara heard the breaking pen before she saw its shouts, the thunder of hooves, a crash of wood. Rounding the barn, she stopped in her tracks. Wyatt stood in the center of a circular corral, facing a magnificent black horse that pawed the ground and tossed its head. Man and animal circled each other in a careful dance, Wyatt moving with controlled grace, the horse radiating barely contained power. Several cowboys perched on the fence rails, calling encouragement and advice. They fell silent when they noticed Clara. Wyatt glanced over, saw her, and in that moment of distraction, the horse charged. He sidestepped smoothly, one hand brushing the animal's flank as it passed. Easy now, he murmured, his voice carrying in the sudden quiet. Easy. Nobody's going to hurt you. Clara found herself holding her breath as the dance continued. Gradually, the horse's movements became less aggressive, more curious. When Wyatt finally extended his hand, the animal stretched its neck forward, nostrils flaring, before accepting his touch. A cheer went up from the watching men. Wyatt gave the horse a final pat and slipped through the rails, his shirt dark with sweat despite the cool morning. Miss Whitmore, he said, slightly breathless. Good, you made it. That was remarkable. Clara said honestly. A slight flush colored his cheeks above his beard. Just patience and persistence. Come on, I'll show you what needs doing. He led her to the bunkhouse, a long, low building that smelled of leather and tobacco and men. The windows were bare, and Clara could see why curtains were needed. The afternoon sun would make the place an oven. I've got fabric in the main house, Wyatt said. Bought it last time I was in Denver, but never got around to... He shrugged. Well, you'll see. The main house surprised her. From outside, it looked like typical ranch construction, but inside, traces of refinement remained. Good furniture, now dusty. Empty picture frames on the walls. A woman's touch, faded but still visible. Wyatt led her to a back room where bolts of fabric lay on a table, good quality cotton in practical colors. This should work, Clara said, running her hand over the material. I'll need to take measurements. Whatever you need. He shifted uncomfortably. I'll be outside if you require anything. Clara spent the morning measuring windows and calculating fabric requirements. The house felt strange lived in, but not truly inhabited, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for something. In what must have been a sewing room, she found a treadle sewing machine, dusty but functional. Evidence of abandonment lay everywhere, a pincushion with needles still stuck in it, thread spools lined up by color, a half-finished quilt folded in a basket. Found everything all right? Wyatt's voice from the doorway made her jump. Yes, I hope you don't mind. I was looking for shears. Use whatever you need. He entered the room slowly, as if it pained him. Someone used to work in here, a while ago. Clara didn't push for more information, but she understood now. A woman had lived here, sewn here, made this house a home. And now she was gone. They worked in companionable silence for a while. Clara cutting fabric while Wyatt repaired a bridle at the table. His presence was oddly comforting, solid, steady, asking nothing of her but her skill with needle and thread. You're different from what I expected, he said suddenly. Clara looked up from her cutting. What did you expect? Don't know exactly. Burke made it sound like... He frowned. Well, it doesn't matter what he said. Man's a fool, like I told you. Mr. Burke wanted someone decorative, Clara said, trying to keep the bitterness from her voice. I've never been that... Nothing wrong with being useful instead of decorative. Wyatt tested the repaired bridle, satisfied with his work. Out here, useful lasts longer. They were interrupted by the lunch bell. Clara expected to eat alone, but Wyatt led her to the main table where the hands were gathering. The men stood as she approached, hats in hands, suddenly shy. Boys, this is Miss Whitmore. She's doing some sewing work for us. Mind your manners. They did, almost comically so. Past the biscuits became, Would you care for a biscuit, ma'am? The usual rough jokes disappeared entirely. Clara found it endearing. These weathered cowboys trying so hard to be gentlemen. After lunch, she continued work on the curtains while Wyatt returned to his horses. Through the window, she could watch him in the corral, patient and persistent, as he'd said. There was something beautiful about it. The way he moved, the way the horses responded to him. He's good with them, she said to Hank when he came to check on her progress. Best in 3 counties, Hank agreed. Got a gift for understanding what they need. Horses know when a man's honest. By late afternoon, Clara had finished cutting all the pieces and begun sewing the first curtain. The treadle machine worked smoothly once she'd oiled it, and she lost herself in the rhythm of the work. Time to head back, Wyatt said from the doorway. The sun slanted low, painting everything golden. Hank's got the wagon ready. I can finish 2 more curtains if I had another hour. Another day, he said firmly. I promise, Mrs. Carmichael, you'd be back before dark. As they walked to the wagon, Clara noticed him favoring his left side slightly. You're hurt. It's nothing. That black caught me with a hoof. Happens. It needs tending. It's nothing, he repeated. But Clara had learned stubbornness in her own family. Sit, she ordered, pointing to the wagon step. To her surprise, he obeyed. The bruise along his ribs was already purpling. Clara fetched her sewing kit, which contained basic medical supplies, another habit from her mother. This will sting, she warned, dabbing the scraped skin with carbolic. Wyatt didn't flinch, but she felt the tension in him, the careful control. This close, she could smell leather and horse and honest sweat, could see the silver threading through his dark hair. There, she said, stepping back. Keep it clean and it should heal fine. Their eyes met and held for a moment. Something passed between them, unnamed but real as the desert wind. Then Wyatt stood, tugging his shirt down. Thank you, he said quietly. The ride back to town was silent, but it was a comfortable silence. Clara held her sewing basket and watched the landscape change in the fading light. She'd found something today, though she couldn't quite name it, a place where her skills were valued, work that mattered, and maybe, just maybe, a connection to someone who understood what it meant to carry loss and keep going anyway. At the boarding house, Wyatt helped her down from the wagon. His hands lingered at her waist just a moment longer than necessary. Same time next week, he asked. I'll be ready. He touched his hat brim and was gone, leaving Clara standing in the twilight, her heart beating faster than it should. That night, she wrote to her mother, I'm finding my place here, Mama, in ways I didn't expect. Today I sewed curtains and tended a wound and ate beans with cowboys who called me ma'am. It's not the life I planned. But maybe that's all right. Maybe the best lives are the ones we don't plan. There's a man, but no, I won't write about that yet. Just know that I'm learning to hope again, carefully, the way he teaches horses to trust. Your loving daughter, Clara. The week settled into a rhythm. Thursdays at the ranch became Clara's favorite day, though she tried not to examine too closely why that might be. She'd finished the bunkhouse curtains and moved on to other projects, new shirts for the hands, repairs to the chuck wagon's canvas cover, even a set of saddlebags that Wyatt commissioned specially. It was on her fourth visit that she learned about Margaret. She was working in the sewing room when she knocked over a basket tucked beneath the table. Photographs spilled across the floor. A young woman with kind eyes and dark hair pinned up in the fashion of 5 years past. In several, she stood beside a younger Wyatt, his face unlined by grief, his smile easier than Clara had ever seen it. Her name was Margaret. Clara spun around. Wyatt stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. I'm sorry, Clara said quickly, kneeling to gather the photographs. I didn't mean to... Leave them. His voice was quiet, but not angry. He entered the room and picked up one of the pictures, studying it. We were married 3 years. She died trying to cross Willow Creek during spring flood. Her horse lost its footing. Clara remained silent, understanding that sometimes the best response was simply to listen. I wasn't there, Wyatt continued. Gone to Denver for supplies. By the time I got back, he set the photograph carefully on the table. She was trying to help the Hendricks family. Their little boy had taken fever, same as last month. Margaret never could stand to see a child suffer. The parallel to their recent night helping Lucy Hendricks wasn't lost on Clara. She thought of Mrs. Carmichael's words about neighbors helping neighbors, and understood that Margaret had lived by the same code. She sounds like a wonderful woman, Clara said softly. She was. Wyatt gathered the remaining photographs, returning them to the basket. I thought about leaving after selling the ranch, going somewhere without memories, but this land, it's part of me now. Can't seem to let it go. Sometimes staying takes more courage than leaving. Clara offered. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw the depth of understanding in his eyes. He knew she spoke from experience. Maybe so, he said finally. Anyway, I wanted you to know, seemed wrong. You working in a room without knowing whose it was. Would you prefer I work somewhere else? No. The answer came quick and firm. No, it's good to see the room used again. Margaret would have liked that. Would have liked you, I think. He left before Clara could respond, but his words stayed with her through the afternoon. That evening, as Hank drove her back to town, she found herself thinking not of Margaret's death, but of her life, a woman who'd crossed flooded creeks to help sick children, who'd made curtains for bunkhouses and probably fed countless cowboys at her table. The next day, Mrs. Carmichael noticed Clara's thoughtful mood. "You're quiet today, dear. Everything all right at the Langston place?" Clara set down the dress she was hemming. "Wyatt told me about his wife, Margaret." "Ah." Mrs. Carmichael's hand stilled on her own sewing. "Poor Margaret. Lovely girl, full of life. Her death nearly broke Wyatt. He blamed himself for not being there, though Lord knows nobody could have saved her once that current took her." "He still loves her," Clara said, trying to keep her voice neutral. "Of course he does. You don't stop loving someone just because they're gone." Mrs. Carmichael gave her a sharp look. "But the heart's not a cup that empties, child. It's more like a well. Always room for more water, if you're brave enough to let it in." Clara returned to her sewing, but her thoughts remained tangled. She'd felt the growing connection between herself and Wyatt, the way their silences had become comfortable, the way he looked for her approval when he showed her something he'd repaired. But how could she compete with a ghost? How could anyone? That Sunday after church, which Clara attended mainly to avoid gossip about being godless, she encountered Thomas Burke outside the general store. He was with a young woman Clara didn't recognize, small and blonde and gazing up at him with adoring eyes. "Miss Whitmore," Thomas said stiffly. "May I present Miss Adeline Fletcher, my fiancée?" "How lovely," Clara managed. "Congratulations to you both." Adeline tittered. "Thomas has told me so much about you. How brave you are to work like a man. I could never. I'm far too delicate for such things." Clara bit back several responses, settling on, "We all do what we must, Miss Fletcher." As they parted, she heard Adeline say, "She's even taller than you described." Thomas, how peculiar. Instead of hurt, Clara felt only relief. Thomas Burke had done her a favor by rejecting her. She couldn't imagine pretending to be delicate and helpless for the rest of her life. That Thursday at the ranch, Wyatt seemed restless. He found excuses to check on her progress, bringing her water, adjusting the window light, asking if she needed anything. Finally, Clara set down her needle. "What's troubling you?" He stopped pacing, surprised by her directness. "Nothing, just there's a dance Saturday night. Harvest celebration." "That sounds nice." "Would you—" He cleared his throat. Started again. "That is, folks generally go in pairs. I wondered if you might consider, but then you probably have plenty of offers already." Clara's heart did a curious skip. "I haven't had any offers." "Oh." He seemed genuinely surprised. "Well then, would you go with me to the dance?" She thought of Margaret, of the photographs in the basket, of the wedding ring Wyatt no longer wore but whose absence still showed as a pale band on his finger. "I'm not much of a dancer," she said carefully. "Neither am I." A small smile tugged at his mouth. "We can be terrible together." "All right," Clara heard herself say. "Yes." The look that crossed his face, surprise. Pleasure. Something deeper made her glad she'd accepted. Saturday evening found Clara fretting over her appearance more than she had since leaving New York. She owned only 2 good dresses, and neither seemed right. Too Eastern, too formal for a frontier dance. Nonsense. Mrs. Carmichael declared, "You look lovely. Besides, it's not the dress that matters. It's the woman wearing it." Clara chose the simpler of the two, a deep green that brought out the gold flecks in her gray eyes. She pinned her hair up carefully, allowing a few curls to frame her face. When Wyatt arrived, he stood speechless for a moment. He'd trimmed his beard and wore a clean white shirt with a string tie. He looked, Clara thought, wonderfully handsome. "You're beautiful," he said simply, then colored as if the words had escaped without permission. The dance was held in the town hall, lanterns strung from the rafters and fiddle music spilling into the street. It seemed the entire county had turned out families with children, young couples, older folks who came to watch and gossip. Their entrance together caused a noticeable stir. Clara heard whispers, saw the speculative looks, the Eastern woman and the grieving widower. What a pair they made. "Ignore them," Wyatt murmured, his hand warm at her elbow. "They'll find something else to talk about soon enough." The first dance was a reel, which neither of them knew well. They stumbled through it, laughing at their mistakes. By the second dance, a slower waltz, they'd found their rhythm. Wyatt led with quiet confidence, and Clara discovered that dancing with a partner so much taller made her feel graceful rather than gangly. "You lied," she accused gently. "You dance quite well." "Margaret taught me," he said, then stiffened as if expecting her to pull away. Instead, Clara squeezed his hand. "She was a good teacher." They danced 3 more sets before taking a break. Wyatt fetched them punch while Clara fanned herself, watching the swirling couples. She'd attended plenty of dances in New York, but they'd always felt like performances, everyone playing their assigned roles. Here, people danced because they wanted to, laughed because they were happy, lived because they were alive. "Clara, how wonderful to see you." She turned to find several women from town: Mrs. Davis, the schoolmarm, Mrs. Price from the mercantile, and others whose mending she'd done. "That dress is lovely." Mrs. Davis said, "Did you make it yourself?" "Yes, back in New York." "Well, you must make one for me," Mrs. Price declared. "I've been wanting something new for Christmas." Soon Clara found herself surrounded by women discussing fabric and patterns and trim. When Wyatt returned with the punch, he stood at the edge of the group, a bemused smile on his face. "Seems you're in demand," he said when the women finally dispersed. "It appears so." Clara sipped her punch, surprised by how pleased she felt. Acceptance had come gradually, through work and skill rather than connections or wealth. It felt more real somehow. They danced again as the evening progressed. During a break in the music, they stepped outside for air. The night was clear, stars brilliant in the desert sky. "Thank you for coming with me," Wyatt said quietly. It's been a long time since I enjoyed something like this." "For me, too," Clara admitted. "I was starting to think I'd forgotten how—" They stood close, but not touching, aware of the delicate thing growing between them. Neither wanted to rush it or name it too soon, but it was there, fragile as spring grass, persistent as desert wildflowers. "I should warn you," Wyatt said suddenly. "People will talk about you being seen with me. I'm not exactly considered good marriage material anymore." "Why?" Clara asked, though she suspected she knew. "Because I couldn't save her," he said simply. "Because I loved her too much and wasn't there when she needed me. Because I'm the man who let his wife die." Clara turned to face him fully. "You're the man who trains horses with patience and pays his workers fairly and brought a stranger in from the rain. That's who I see." He looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. Then he offered his arm. "Would you like to dance again?" They returned to the hall, to the music and the lights and the community that was slowly becoming theirs. And if people whispered when Wyatt held her a little closer during the last waltz, when he helped her with her shawl with careful hands, when they left together into the night well, let them whisper. At the boarding house door, Wyatt took her hand. "Clara, I need you to know, I'm not good at this, at moving forward. Some days I still reach for Margaret at dawn, still expect to hear her voice. I don't know if that ever fully goes away. I don't expect it to," Clara said honestly. "We're shaped by who we've loved and lost, but that doesn't mean we stop living." He brought her hand to his lips, the gesture old-fashioned and achingly gentle. "No," he agreed. "It doesn't." After he left, Clara sat at her window, watching the stars. She thought of Margaret, the woman who'd sewn curtains and saved children. She thought of Wyatt, learning to dance in this very town hall with his young wife. She thought of herself, the woman she'd been in New York and the woman she was becoming here. Love wasn't simple at any age, but perhaps it was especially complex when you'd already lost and learned and carried scars. But that didn't make it less worth trying. That night, she wrote to her mother, "I danced tonight, Mama, with a man who grieves his wife as I grieve you and Papa. We're careful with each other, understanding that hearts can break and life can change in an instant. But we danced anyway. Isn't that what courage is, dancing when you know how much it can hurt to lose the music, your loving daughter, Clara?" After the dance, something shifted between Clara and Wyatt. He still maintained a respectful distance, but there was a new awareness in their interactions, a lingering look. A hand offered to help her from the wagon that stayed a moment longer than necessary. Silences that spoke louder than words. The town noticed, of course, in a place like Bridle Pass. Nothing went unobserved. Clara heard the whispers at the mercantile, felt the speculative glances at church. Some were kind older women who smiled knowingly, men who nodded approval at Wyatt's choice. Others were less so. "She set her cap for him right quick," Clara overheard Mrs. Abernathy saying to her circle. "Poor Margaret, not 2 years in the ground." "Eastern women," another replied, "always calculating." Clara forced herself to walk past without responding. Though the words stung, she hadn't come west to catch a husband, and she certainly hadn't calculated anything about Wyatt. If anything, their growing closeness frightened her with its intensity. For his part, Wyatt seemed oblivious to the gossip, or perhaps just indifferent to it. He continued bringing mending work, continued finding reasons for Clara to visit the ranch. But now there were small additions. A book of poetry left on her work table, found this in town, thought you might enjoy it. Wildflowers tucked into the bundle of shirts. They were growing by the gate. Seemed a waste to leave them. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the delicate balance shattered. Clara was at the ranch, working on new seat covers for the chuck wagon, when one of the hands burst in. "Boss needs you, miss. There's been an accident." Clara dropped everything and ran. She found chaos at the corral, men clustered around a figure on the ground. Wyatt. Her heart stopped. "Move aside," she commanded with the authority she didn't know she possessed. The men parted. Wyatt lay still, blood seeping from a gash on his temple. His breathing was steady, but he was unconscious. A young horse stood trembling nearby, reins trailing. "What happened?" "New stallion spooked," Hank explained tersely. "Caught the boss with a hoof when he went down." Clara knelt beside Wyatt, her hands steady despite her racing heart. "Get me clean water and cloth, and someone ride for Mrs. Carmichael. She'll know if we need the doctor from Silver Creek." The men scattered to follow her orders. Clara carefully examined the wound. The bleeding was already slowing. Head wounds always looked worse than they were. She found no other obvious injuries, though he'd have bruises from the fall. Wyatt stirred as she cleaned the wound, his eyes fluttering open. "Clara!" His voice was confused, uncertain. "I'm here. You're all right. Just stay still." He tried to sit up anyway, stubborn man, and she had to press him back down. "The horse." "The horse is fine. You're the one bleeding all over your good shirt." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "You'll have to mend it." "Impossible, man," she muttered, but relief made her voice fond. Mrs. Carmichael arrived within the hour, pronounced Wyatt concussed but not seriously injured, and prescribed rest. Getting him to actually rest proved another matter entirely. "I've got work to do," he protested as Clara and Hank helped him to the house. "The work will keep," Clara said firmly. "You need to lie down before you fall down." She stayed to ensure he followed orders. sitting beside his bed with her sewing while he dozed fitfully. It felt strange being in his private space. The room was Spartan, just a bed, dresser, and single chair. No photographs, no mementos, as if he'd stripped away anything that might remind him of happier times. He woke near sunset, disoriented. "Margaret!" The name was a knife between them. Clara kept her voice gentle. "It's Clara." Recognition returned slowly. "Clara, you're still here." "Someone had to make sure you didn't try to get up and break horses with a cracked skull." He studied her face in the fading light. "I called you Margaret. You were confused. It's natural." "No." He struggled to sit up, and this time she helped him. "I need to say this. These past weeks, being with you, sometimes I forget to grieve. I'll be watching you work, or dancing with you, or just talking. And for whole minutes I forget to be sad. Then I remember, and the guilt." Clara set aside her sewing. "Do you think Margaret would want you to be sad forever?" "I promise to love her forever." "And you will. That doesn't mean you can't live. Wyatt, it doesn't mean you can't feel other things too." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I'm scared." The admission hung between them, raw and honest. "Of what?" Clara asked softly. "Of losing again. Of not being there again. Of caring for you the way I'm starting to and having something happen." His hands clenched on the quilt. "I couldn't survive it twice." Clara understood. She'd felt the same fear, the same certainty that opening her heart again was inviting disaster. But she'd learned something in these weeks in Bridle Pass. "We could both live very carefully," she said slowly. "Never risk, never reach for anything that might be taken away. We could be safe and alone and protected from hurt." She met his eyes. "Is that living, though, or is it just a different kind of dying?" Wyatt reached for her hand, his fingers strong and warm around hers. "You make me want to be brave again. We can be brave together, a little at a time." They sat in the gathering darkness, hands linked, not speaking. Through the window, Clara could see the first stars appearing. Somewhere in the house, a clock ticked. Life moved forward, whether they wanted it to or not. "Stay for supper?" Wyatt asked eventually. "I should get back, Mrs. Carmichael will worry." "Of course." But he didn't release her hand immediately. "Clara, I need you to know what's happening between us. It's not about replacing Margaret. You could never be a substitute for her." "I know," Clara said, and she did. She'd seen how different his love for Margaret was, young and uncomplicated, built on shared dreams and untroubled faith in the future. What was growing between them was something else entirely careful and conscious, built on understanding of loss and choice to continue despite it. "If I sleep beside you," Wyatt said quietly, "don't expect me to let go." The word sent a shiver through Clara, not of fear, but of recognition. He was warning her, promising her, asking her all at once. "I wouldn't expect anything less," she replied. Hank drove her back to town in the purple twilight. Clara found Mrs. Carmichael waiting anxiously. "How is he?" "Stubborn, but he'll be fine." The older woman studied her shrewdly. "And how are you?" Clara considered the question. How was she frightened? Hopeful? Changed by a conversation in a darkened room? "I'm not sure," she admitted. "Mrs. Carmichael patted her shoulder. "Love's never sure, dear. If it was, it wouldn't require courage." That night, sleep eluded Clara. She sat by her window, watching clouds drift across the moon, thinking about promises and warnings and the way Wyatt had said her name like it was something precious. The next few days passed quietly. Wyatt sent word that he was recovering well, though Clara suspected he was up and working despite doctor's orders. She threw herself into her sewing, completing orders with focused determination. Then came the gossip. Mrs. Abernathy cornered Clara outside the post office. I hear you were at the Langston Ranch unchaperoned, tending to Wyatt in his bedroom. He was injured, Clara said evenly. I helped with medical care. How convenient. An Eastern woman who knows exactly how to position herself when a wealthy rancher needs comfort. Clara's temper, usually well controlled, flared. What exactly are you implying, Mrs. Abernathy? I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. You've been here barely a month, and already you're angling for a proposal from a man whose wife... His wife died 2 years ago. Clara interrupted. Helping neighbors who've lost loved ones. If Wyatt chooses to move forward with his life, that's his decision. And if he chooses to make that journey with me, that's ours. Your approval is neither required nor desired. Mrs. Abernathy's face flushed. Well, I never... No, Clara agreed. You never... Good day. She walked away, head high, but her hands trembled. By evening, the story would be all over town, the Eastern woman who'd told off Mrs. Abernathy. She'd either made a powerful enemy or earned the town's respect, possibly both. When she reached the boarding house, she found Wyatt waiting on the porch, looking pale but determined. You shouldn't be up, she said. Heard you had words with Mrs. Abernathy. News traveled fast. She had opinions about my reputation. And I had opinions about her opinions. A slow smile spread across his face. That's my Clara. My Clara? The words settled around her like a shawl. People are going to talk, she warned. Let them. He stepped closer, and she could see the remains of the bruise on his temple, the careful way he moved. I'm tired of living for other people's expectations. Margaret wouldn't want that. She'd have liked you, you know, your strength, your refusal to shrink yourself for anyone's comfort. You can't know that. I can, because I knew her, and I know you. Different women, different loves, but both worth risking for. Standing there on the porch, with the whole town potentially watching, Clara made her choice. She reached up and gently touched the bruise on his temple. No more accidents, she said softly. I can't lose someone else to this wild country. I'll be careful, he promised. Then, quieter, stay. It wasn't clear what he was asking. Stay for supper, stay in Bridle Pass, stay with him for whatever time they had. But Clara's answer was the same regardless. Yes. The Harvest Festival arrived with October's golden light. The entire town threw itself into preparation booths to build, pies to bake, competitions to organize. Clara found herself drawn into the whirlwind, commissioned to create bunting for the main street and a special dress for the mayor's wife. You'll need something special to wear yourself, Mrs. Carmichael insisted one evening as they worked on decorations. Wyatt won't be able to take his eyes off you. Clara blushed, but didn't deny the relationship that had become obvious to everyone. Since their conversation on the porch, Wyatt had been quietly but persistently courting her. Small gestures that spoke volumes, a rocking chair appeared on Mrs. Carmichael's porch where Clara liked to sew, always positioned to catch the morning light. Fresh game mysteriously showed up at the boarding house kitchen. Books of poetry and philosophy found their way to her room. I have my green dress, Clara said, trying to be practical. Nonsense. You need something new, something that shows you belong here. The word struck deep. Did she belong here? The town had slowly accepted her, especially after her confrontation with Mrs. Abernathy. Women sought her out for clothing advice. Men tipped their hats respectfully. Children waved when she passed. But belonging was more than acceptance. That Thursday at the ranch, Clara mentioned the festival while hemming new work shirts. Wyatt was repairing tack at the same table, their comfortable rhythm established over weeks of shared work. Will you enter any of the competitions? She asked. The horse race, probably. Midnight's been itching to run. He glanced up. What about you? Mrs. Price wants me to enter the pie contest, but I'm not much of a baker. My skills run more to practical things. Nothing wrong with practical. He set down the bridle he was working on. "Clara, there's something I want to ask you." Her needle stilled. The serious tone in his voice made her heart race. "At the festival, there's a tradition. Couples who are considering a future together, they dance around the harvest fire. It's a declaration of sorts. Public." Clara understood what he was asking. In a place like Bridle Pass, such traditions mattered. Dancing around the harvest fire would be announcing their intentions to the entire town. "Are we?" she asked quietly. "Considering a future together?" Wyatt rose and came around the table, kneeling beside her chair so their eyes were level. Have been since the day you told me you wouldn't expect anything less than holding on tight, but I need to know if you're ready for that. The talk, the comparisons to Margaret, the weight of being with someone who's already lost." Clara stopped him with a finger to his lips. "I've been ready since you warned me what sleeping beside you would mean." His eyes darkened with emotion. "Then dance with me. Let them all see that Clara Whitmore and Wyatt Langston are planning a life together." "Yes," Clara breathed, and sealed it with a kiss that tasted of promises and desert sage. The festival day dawned clear and bright. Clara wore the new dress she'd secretly sewn deep blue like the evening sky, trimmed with silver buttons that caught the light. It was practical enough for the frontier, but elegant in its simplicity. When she looked in the mirror, she saw not an Eastern woman trying to fit in, but a Western woman who'd found her place. The town had transformed overnight. Booths lined Main Street selling everything from preserves to horseshoes. Children ran between the displays, faces sticky with candy. The smell of roasting meat and baking pies filled the air. Clara found herself swept into the festivities. She helped judge the needlework competition, admired the prize vegetables, and cheered when Wyatt won the horse race on midnight, the black stallion he'd been training the day she first saw him. "Show off," she teased when he dismounted, flushed with victory. "Maybe a little," he admitted with a grin that made him look years younger. "Had to impress my girl somehow." My girl. The casual possession of it warmed her more than the autumn sun. As afternoon faded to evening, the harvest fire was lit in the town square. Musicians tuned their instruments while couples began to gather. Clara noticed Thomas Burke and his fiancée among them, Adeline clinging to his arm and giggling at something he'd said. Nervous, Wyatt appeared at her elbow, handsome in his best shirt and vest. "No," Clara realized with surprise. "Not at all." And she wasn't, standing there beside him, preparing to declare their intentions before the entire town. Clara felt only certainty. This was right. They were right. Not perfect, not without complications, but right. The music began. A lively reel that set couples spinning around the fire. Wyatt led Clara into the dance, and she discovered that dancing with him in public felt different than at the harvest dance weeks ago. Then, they'd been testing the waters. Now, they moved as partners who knew each other's rhythm. She caught glimpses of faces in the crowd as they circled the fire. Mrs. Carmichael beaming with maternal pride, Hank and the ranch hands whistling approval. Mrs. Abernathy looking sour but resigned. Even the Hendricks family had come to town for the festival. Little Lucy waving enthusiastically from her father's shoulders. "Everyone's watching," Clara murmured. "Let them," Wyatt said, spinning her through a turn. "I want them all to see how proud I am to be with you." The dance required couples to separate and weave between other dancers before reuniting. Each time Wyatt's hand found hers again, Clara felt the promise in his touch. "This is permanent," it said. "This is forever." As the music reached its crescendo, tradition called for each man to lift his partner, spinning her around before setting her back on her feet. Wyatt's hands were strong and sure at Clara's waist as he lifted her, and for a moment she felt like she was flying, the fire and stars and watching faces blurring into streaks of light. When he set her down, he didn't immediately release her. They stood there, breathless and glowing, as the music ended and applause erupted from the crowd. "Well," Clara said, suddenly shy under all those eyes, "I guess that's done it." Good, Wyatt replied, and kissed her right there in front of everyone. The celebration continued late into the night. Clara lost count of the people who approached to offer congratulations. Some seemed genuinely happy for them. Others were merely curious. A few, she could tell, were comparing her to Margaret, finding her wanting or worthy depending on their memories. Don't let it trouble you, Mrs. Davis advised, noticing Clara's tension. Margaret was special to this town. She taught some of our children, nursed people through sickness, brought joy wherever she went. But that doesn't diminish what you bring. Different doesn't mean less. Later, as the crowd thinned and the fire burned lower, Wyatt walked Clara back to the boarding house. They took the long way, neither ready for the evening to end. Thank you, Wyatt said suddenly. For what? For being brave enough to dance with me, for taking on my ghosts along with my heart, for seeing who I am now, not just who I was. Clara stopped walking, turning to face him fully. You do the same for me. You see the woman who speaks her mind and stands too tall and doesn't fit anyone's mold, and somehow you think that's wonderful instead of wrong. It is wonderful. You're wonderful. He cupped her face gently. I love you, Clara. Not because you're here and available. Not because I'm lonely, but because you're you, stubborn and strong and so beautiful, it takes my breath away. Clara's eyes filled with tears she didn't try to hide. I love you too, despite the risks, because of the risks. All of it. They stood there in the moonlight, holding each other, while music and laughter drifted from the town square. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, wedding plans to make, 2 lives to blend, memories to honor while creating new ones. But tonight, they had the certainty of choice, the promise of partnership, the courage to love after loss. Stay with me, Wyatt whispered against her hair. Not tonight, I know that's not proper, but soon, stay with me always. Always, Clara agreed, and meant it with every fiber of her being. When they finally reached the boarding house, Mrs. Carmichael was waiting on the porch, trying to look stern, but failing to hide her delight. About time you two made it official, she declared. I was beginning to think I'd have to lock you in a room together. Nettie, Wyatt groaned, but he was smiling. Don't you Nettie me, Wyatt Langston. I've watched you pine for weeks. And you, she pointed at Clara, pretending you weren't counting the days until Thursday. Least subtle courtship I've ever witnessed. Clara laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. We were that obvious. Dear girl, the horses at the ranch probably knew before you did. Mrs. Carmichael's expression softened. But obvious isn't bad. Neither is finding love again when you thought that part of your life was over. Be happy, both of you. You've earned it. After Wyatt left and Mrs. Carmichael retired, Clara sat at her window as had become her habit. But tonight, instead of writing to her mother's memory, she simply sat and felt the reality of her new life settle around her. She'd come west expecting one future and found another entirely, not easier, not simpler, but richer and more real than anything she'd imagined. Tomorrow she'd start planning a wedding, merging her life with a man who understood loss and chose love anyway. She'd continue building her place in this community, one stitch and one kindness at a time. But tonight, she simply held her happiness close and watched the stars wheel overhead, each one a promise that even in the vast darkness, light persisted, and in her heart, where grief and loneliness had lived for so long, love bloomed like wildflowers after rain, unexpected, resilient, and absolutely beautiful. The week after the Harvest Festival, Wyatt took Clara to a place she'd never seen before, a small cemetery on a hillside overlooking Willow Creek. The October wind rustled through the cottonwoods as they stood before a simple stone marker. Margaret Ann Langston, beloved wife, 1,849 to 1,873 inches. Clara had insisted on coming. I need to pay my respects, she'd said when Wyatt seemed uncertain. She was part of your life, That makes her part of mine now, too. Wyatt removed his hat, turning it in his hands. I come here less often than I used to. At first, it was every day, then every week. Now, he trailed off. Now you're living again. Clara finished gently. That's what she would want. I used to talk to her, he admitted. Tell her about the ranch, the horses, the weather. Asked her questions I knew she couldn't answer. He looked at Clara. I wanted to bring you here to, I don't know, to introduce you. I suppose that sounds foolish. Not at all. Clara stepped forward and placed a small bouquet of autumn wildflowers on the grave purple asters and golden rabbit brush she'd gathered that morning. Margaret, she said quietly, I want you to know I'll take care of him. Not the same way you did, I could never be you, but I'll love him and stand beside him and try to be the partner he deserves. I hope that brings you peace. Wyatt's hand found hers, squeezing tight. When she looked at him, tears tracked down his weathered cheeks. They stood there together in the morning light, past and present meeting on that windswept hill. Then Wyatt wiped his face, set his hat back on his head, and said, Come on, let me show you something else. He led her along the creek to where it widened into a natural pool, sheltered by willows and cottonwoods. This was her favorite spot in summer. She'd come here to think, to cool off, to be alone when the ranch got too busy. Clara could see why. The place was peaceful, almost magical, with sunlight filtering through the leaves and the water running clear over smooth stones. She was trying to reach the Hendricks place by the shorter route. Wyatt continued, across the creek upstream where it narrows, but spring runoff had made it treacherous. Her horse... He stopped, jaw working. Clara waited, understanding he needed to tell this story in his own time. They found her 3 miles downstream. The doc said she likely died quick, hit her head on a rock. Small mercy. His voice was steady now, almost detached. I got back from Denver 2 days later. Hank met me at the train. Told me before I could even ask why he'd come instead of her. I'm sorry, Clara said, knowing the words were inadequate but necessary. For a long time. I wished I'd died too. Not that I would have done anything to make that happen, but I'd go to sleep hoping not to wake up. You know, he picked up a stone, skipped it across the pool. Then one day I realized that would be insulting her memory. Margaret loved life too much for me to waste mine grieving her. Is that when you started living again? Started trying, anyway. Wasn't doing too well at it until a tall woman from New York got caught in a rainstorm. He turned to her then, his expression soft. I need you to understand something. I will never stop loving Margaret. Part of my heart will always belong to her. But that doesn't mean I love you any less. You're not sharing half a heart. You have all of me that's here now. All of me that's still capable of loving. Does that make sense? Clara thought of her own losses, her own ghosts. Perfect sense. We don't love in portions. Wyatt, we just love. What we had before shapes us but doesn't limit us. You always know just what to say. Hardly. I just know what it's like to carry loss and choose love anyway. They left the creek and the cemetery behind, riding back to town in companionable silence. But Clara noticed Wyatt seemed lighter somehow, as if sharing that sacred place had lifted a weight he'd been carrying. The next few weeks flew by in a whirlwind of planning. A December wedding was decided upon close enough to not seem like unseemly haste, far enough to make proper preparations. Clara threw herself into sewing her wedding dress, a practical but elegant creation in dove-gray wool that would serve for special occasions afterward. Not white, Mrs., Carmichael asked, fingering the fine fabric. I'm not a young bride, Clara replied. White would feel like pretending. Wise choice. Wyatt's not a young groom either. You're both coming to this with experience, with understanding. That's worth more than innocence. Word of the engagement had spread through the county like wildfire. Orders poured in for Clara's needlework. Suddenly every woman needed a new dress or alterations. She suspected it was partly curiosity, partly the community's way of showing support. One afternoon, while working on Mrs. Morrison's new Sunday dress, Clara was surprised by a visitor, a young woman, perhaps 25, with Margaret's dark hair and kind eyes. "You're Clara," the woman said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, and you are—" "Rebecca Hartley, Margaret's younger sister." Clara's hand stilled on the fabric. She'd known Margaret had family back east, but Wyatt rarely mentioned them. "I see the resemblance," Clara said carefully, unsure of the woman's intentions. Rebecca smiled, and it was like seeing an echo of the photographs in Wyatt's sewing room. "I came to meet the woman who's bringing him back to life." "I'm not—" "You are," Rebecca interrupted. "I've been corresponding with Mrs. Carmichael. She writes that Wyatt smiles again, laughs again, that he's planning a future instead of just enduring the present." Clara set aside her sewing, giving the young woman her full attention. "You're not upset that he's moving forward?" "Upset?" Rebecca's eyes widened. "Oh no, you misunderstand. I'm grateful. Margaret would be too." She leaned forward earnestly. "My sister loved that man with everything in her. The last letter she sent me, just a week before she died, was full of plans. They were going to expand the ranch, maybe start a family. She wanted Wyatt to have all of that, the life they'd dreamed of together." "With her," Clara pointed out gently. "With her, yes, but she wasn't naive. 'If anything happens to me,' she wrote once, I hope Wyatt finds someone else to share his days with. He's got too much love in him to waste it on grief." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "She sounds remarkable." "She was, but from what I hear, so are you." Rebecca reached into her bag and pulled out a small, wrapped package. "I brought this. It was our mother's, then Margaret's. I think she'd want you to have it." Inside was a delicate silver brooch in the shape of intertwined flowers, forget-me-nots and roses. "I can't accept this," Clara protested. "You can and you will," Rebecca said firmly. "Consider it a blessing from one woman who loves Wyatt to another. Wear it at your wedding. Let it be a bridge between past and future." After Rebecca left, Clara sat holding the brooch, overwhelmed by the generosity of it. In New York, former loves were rivals, threats to be guarded against. Here, in this raw and honest place, love seemed to expand rather than compete. That evening, she showed Wyatt the brooch. His face went through several emotions. Surprise, sadness, something that might have been relief. "Rebecca came to see you. She wanted to meet me, to give her blessing. I think—" "That sounds like her. She's got Margaret's heart but twice her boldness." He touched the brooch gently. "This was Margaret's favorite piece. She wore it to our wedding." "Then perhaps I shouldn't." "No," he said quickly. "Rebecca's right. Margaret would want this. She always said beautiful things shouldn't be hidden away." He met Clara's eyes. "That goes for people too." The conversation with Rebecca seemed to unlock something in the community. Women who'd held themselves apart now approached Clara with genuine warmth. Stories of Margaret emerged not to diminish Clara, but to include her in the continuity of the ranch, the town, the life Wyatt had built. "Margaret taught my Emma to read," one woman confided, patient as a saint with her. "She helped birth my son when the doctor couldn't come," another shared. "Stayed all night, singing to keep me calm." Clara treasured these glimpses of her predecessor, understanding that Margaret's legacy wasn't a shadow to escape, but a foundation to build upon. The Sunday before their wedding, Reverend Mills asked to meet with them. They sat in his small study behind the church, afternoon light slanting through dusty windows. "I married Wyatt and Margaret," he said without preamble. "Performed her funeral service, too. Now here we are again." He looked between them. "Some might say it's too soon, that Wyatt's trying to replace what he lost. What do you say to that?" "I'd say they don't understand." Clara replied, "You can't replace a person like you'd replace a broken tool. Wyatt's not looking for another Margaret. He's choosing to love again. Differently, but not less. That takes more courage than hiding behind grief. The Reverend turned to Wyatt. And you, are you ready to make vows again, knowing how quickly they can be severed? More ready because I know, Wyatt said quietly. I've learned how precious time is, how foolish it is to waste it. Every day with Clara is a gift I won't take for granted. Reverend Mills nodded slowly. Then I'll be honored to perform the ceremony. May it bring joy to balance the sorrow, future to honor the past. Walking home, Clara asked. Do you think we're doing the right thing? Wyatt stopped, taking both her hands. I think we're doing the brave thing, the necessary thing, the thing that makes us both more alive than we've been in years. He kissed her forehead softly. If that's not right, I don't know what is. That night, Clara wrote her last letter to her mother as an unmarried woman. Tomorrow I become a wife. Mama, not the wife I once imagined. I'd be young and innocent and certain the future held only joy. But perhaps a better wife for having known loss, for choosing love with full knowledge of its cost. I'll wear Margaret's brooch and think of you, of her, of all the women who've loved bravely before me. I'm not afraid anymore. How can I be, when I've already survived the worst and found that life still offers gifts worth reaching for your loving daughter, soon-to-be Clara Langston? She folded the letter carefully, placed it under her pillow one last time. Tomorrow would bring a new name, a new home, a new chapter. But tonight, suspended between past and future, Clara felt perfectly balanced, ready, whole, alive with possibility. Winter arrived early that year, bringing Clara's wedding day with a dusting of snow that made Bridal Pass look like something from a fairy tale. She stood in her room at the boarding house one last time, adjusting Margaret's brooch on her dove-gray dress. Beautiful, Mrs., Carmichael said from the doorway, tears gathering in her eyes. Just beautiful. I'm nervous, Clara admitted. Not about marrying Wyatt, about everything else. Running a ranch house, managing the hands, being compared to... Stop right there, Mrs., Carmichael interrupted firmly. You're not replacing anyone. You're creating something new. The ranch needs a woman's touch again. Yes, but your touch, your way. The small church was fuller than Clara had expected. It seemed the entire county had come to witness Wyatt Langston's second chance at happiness. She paused at the entrance, overwhelmed by the faces turning toward her, some curious, some supportive, all watching to see what kind of wife she would make. Then she saw Wyatt waiting at the altar, and everyone else faded away. He stood tall and steady in his best suit, his face transformed by a smile that reached his eyes. Hank stood beside him as best man, looking uncomfortable in his Sunday clothes, but proud to be there. Clara walked down the aisle alone. She'd insisted on it. She wasn't being given away or transferred like property. She was choosing this, walking toward her future with her own strength. When she reached Wyatt, he whispered, "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." "Flatterer," she whispered back, but her heart sang. Reverend Mills performed a simple ceremony, his words about commitment and courage resonating through the small space. When he reached the vows, Clara heard Wyatt's voice catch slightly on, "Till death do us part," not with fear, but with full understanding of what those words meant. Her own voice was clear and strong as she made her promises. She'd written her own vows, surprising everyone. "I promise to stand beside you in joy and sorrow, knowing both will come. I promise to honor what was while building what will be. I promise to love you not in spite of your scars, but because they've shaped the man you are. I promise to be your partner, your comfort, and your challenge. And I promise, when you sleep beside me, to hold on tight and never let go." Wyatt's eyes glistened as he pulled her close for the kiss that sealed their union. The church erupted in cheers and applause, and Clara felt something settle deep in her chest, a rightness, a sense of coming home. The reception was held at the town hall. transformed with Clara's handmade decorations and the generosity of neighbors who'd contributed food and music. Clara found herself swept from one group to another, accepting congratulations and good wishes. "Welcome to ranch life," said Mrs. Patterson, whose husband managed the spread next to Wyatt's. "It's hard work, but rewarding, and that house has been too quiet too long." During a break in the dancing, Rebecca approached with a young man Clara recognized as the new bank clerk. "My husband, James," Rebecca introduced. "We came west after I heard about the engagement. Seemed like time to reconnect with family." "You're staying?" Wyatt asked, having overheard. "If you'll have us, James has a position at the bank, and I thought—" Rebecca glanced between them. "I thought maybe it was time to heal old distances." Wyatt pulled his sister-in-law into a fierce hug. "Margaret would be so happy." Later, as the evening wound down, Clara noticed Wyatt standing by the window, looking out at the snowy street. She joined him, slipping her hand into his. "Second thoughts?" she asked lightly. "Never. Just thinking about roads not taken. Choices made." He turned to her. "I could have left after Margaret died. Started fresh somewhere with no memories. But I stayed. And because I stayed, you found me." "We found each other," Clara corrected. They left the reception in a shower of rice and good wishes. Riding through the snow to the ranch, the house glowed with lamplight. The hands had prepared everything. Fires in the hearths, flowers in the rooms, a simple supper waiting. "Welcome home, Mrs. Langston," Wyatt said, lifting her over the threshold. "I like the sound of that," Clara replied, then looked around with new eyes. This was hers now, not just to inhabit, but to shape. "First thing tomorrow, we're cleaning out that sewing room properly. I want to set up my workshop there, if that's all right." "It's more than all right. It's what should happen." Wyatt set her down gently. "This is your home now. Our home. Change whatever needs changing." They ate their wedding supper quietly, the reality of their new life settling around them. Then Wyatt led her upstairs to the bedroom they would share, not the one he'd shared with Margaret. Clara noticed with relief, but a different room that looked out over the horse pastures. That night, as they lay together for the first time as husband and wife, Wyatt kept his promise. He held her close, arms secure around her as if she might disappear if he loosened his grip. "Too tight," he murmured against her hair. "Never," Clara assured him. "I'm not going anywhere." "Good, because I meant what I warned you. I don't let go." "Neither do I," she replied, and proved it by holding him just as firmly. The next morning, Clara woke to find Wyatt already up, standing by the window watching the sunrise paint the snow-covered mountains pink and gold. "Beautiful view," she said, joining him. "Gets better every day," he replied, but he was looking at her, not the mountains. They spent their first day as married folks working side by side, Wyatt showing her the house's quirks and routines, Clara beginning to make small changes that would mark her presence. She set up her sewing supplies in the room that had been Margaret's workshop, saying a quiet prayer of thanks to the woman who'd come before as she did. The ranch hands were shyly respectful, clearly unsure how to treat the new Mrs. Langston. Clara solved that by diving straight into work, mending tears and cooking alongside Chen, the ranch cook who'd been skeptical of interference in his kitchen until he tasted her cornbread. "You'll do," Chen pronounced, which Hank later told her was high praise indeed. Within a week, Clara had established her routine. Mornings were for household management and cooking. Afternoons for her sewing work orders had increased since the wedding, everyone wanting something made by the new Mrs. Langston. Evenings were for Wyatt, for sitting by the fire talking over the day's work, planning improvements to the ranch, or simply being quiet together. It wasn't always easy. There were moments when Clara would find something of Margaret's tucked in a drawer, or see Wyatt's face go distant with memory. Once, she heard him call Margaret's name in his sleep, and lay awake afterward wondering if she'd made a mistake. But then morning would come, and Wyatt would pull her close and murmur, "Good morning, Mrs. Langston," in a voice rough with sleep and affection, and she'd know they were exactly where they belonged. 3 weeks after the wedding, the promised winter storm hit with vengeance. Snow piled against the windows. Wind howled like a living thing, and the temperature plummeted until even the well-stoked fires couldn't entirely chase away the cold. "We'll lose cattle if this keeps up," Wyatt said grimly, peering out at the white wilderness their ranch had become. "Then we'd better save them," Clara replied, already reaching for her warmest clothes. "You're staying inside where it's safe," Wyatt said automatically, then caught her expression. "Clara, I'm your partner, remember, in everything. Now tell me what needs doing." They worked through the blizzard together, alongside the hands, bringing the most vulnerable cattle into the barn, breaking ice on water troughs, distributing extra feed. Clara's hands went numb despite her gloves. Her face stung from the wind, but she didn't complain or quit. "Your wife's got sand," Hank commented to Wyatt as they watched Clara help drive a group of strays towards shelter. "More than sand," Wyatt replied with pride. "She's got steel in her spine." That night, exhausted and cold but victorious, they'd lost no cattle. Clara and Wyatt huddled together in bed while the storm continued to rage outside. "I never expected this," Wyatt said into the darkness. "The storm. This having a true partner again, someone who stands beside me even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." He pulled her closer. "I love you more every day. Didn't know that was possible, but it is." "I love you too," Clara replied. "Storm and all, struggle and all. This is the life I choose." As if in response to her declaration, the wind died down. The howling softened to whispers. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving their world transformed by white but intact. Standing on the porch with coffee, watching the sun spark diamonds on the snow, Clara felt a deep contentment. She'd come west seeking one life and found another, lost one future and gained a better one. The woman who'd stepped off the train in Bridle Pass seemed like a stranger, now uncertain, displaced, alone. Now she was Clara Langston, ranch wife and skilled seamstress, partner and beloved. She had work that mattered, a community that valued her, and a love that had been tested by loss and chosen anyway. "Penny for your thoughts," Wyatt said, joining her with his own coffee. "Just thinking about journeys, how we end up places we never expected." "Our regrets." Clara turned to look at him. Her husband, her choice, her home. Not a one. He smiled, that slow, warm smile that transformed his weathered face. "Good, because I plan on keeping you for the next 50 years or so. Only 50. To start with, we'll negotiate after that." They laughed together as the morning sun climbed higher, warming their faces and the land they worked together. Inside, breakfast waited. Outside, chores called. But for this moment, they simply stood together, coffee growing cold in their hands, hearts warm with the certainty of choice and the promise of all the mornings yet to come. The winter deepened, bringing the kind of cold that made the ranch house timbers crack in the night. Clara had adapted to the rhythm of ranch life with surprising ease, but nothing had prepared her for a high plains winter. The wind never stopped, finding every gap in the walls, every weakness in their defenses against its bitter touch. It was on such a night, with snow driving sideways past the windows, that Clara woke to find Wyatt's side of the bed empty. She found him by the dying fire, staring into the embers with that distant look she'd learned meant he was somewhere else. Someone else. "Bad dream?" she asked softly, wrapping a quilt around her shoulders before joining him. "Memory," he corrected. "This kind of storm. Margaret loved them. Said they made the house feel like a ship in rough seas, and we were safe in the hold together." Clara didn't speak, just settled beside him and waited. "I used to hate myself for the memories. Wyatt continued. Felt like betrayal, thinking of her while lying next to you. But you know what I realized? What? The memories don't hurt the same way anymore. They're still there. Still part of me. But they're softer somehow. Like old photographs instead of fresh wounds. He turned to look at her. That's because of you. You've helped me make peace with the past. We've helped each other, Clara said, thinking of her own ghosts, her own letters to a mother who would never read them. She'd stopped writing them the day after the wedding, realizing she no longer needed that conversation with the dead. She had the living now. Wyatt pulled her close, and they sat watching the fire die to ashes while the storm raged outside. Neither suggested returning to bed. Sometimes the important moments happened in the dark spaces between sleep and waking, in the honest hours before dawn. When morning came, it brought news that would test their still new partnership. Hank arrived with breakfast, his face grim. Hendrick's family is in trouble, he reported. Their roof partially collapsed under the snow weight. The kids... Are they hurt? Clara was already moving, gathering supplies. Lucy's got a broken arm. Looks like the boy's fine but scared. Mrs. Hendricks is trying to hold it all together, but with her husband still laid up from that fall last month. Get the wagon ready, Wyatt ordered. Clara, what do we need? They worked as a team, gathering food, medical supplies, warm blankets, tools for repair. Within an hour, they were on the road, joined by several hands who volunteered to help. The Hendricks homestead looked even more modest than Clara remembered, made worse by the gaping hole in the roof where snow had cascaded into their main room. Mrs. Hendricks met them at the door, tears of relief streaming down her face. I didn't know who else to turn to, she sobbed. You did right, Clara assured her, already moving to check on Lucy. The girl's arm was indeed broken, but cleanly. Clara had helped set bones during her mother's work with the poor in New York. With Mrs. Carmichael's training added to that. She felt confident handling this. While she tended to Lucy, Wyatt organized the repair effort. By the end of the day, they'd patched the roof well enough to last until spring when proper repairs could be made. The Hendricks family had a warm, dry place to sleep and enough food to last several weeks. We'll pay you back, Mr. Hendricks said from his sick bed, pride warring with gratitude in his voice. You'll do no such thing, Wyatt replied firmly. Neighbors help neighbors. That's how it works out here. On the ride home, Clara noticed Wyatt's thoughtful expression. What is it? She asked. Just thinking about cycles, circles. Margaret died trying to help that family, and now here we are, doing the same thing. It feels right somehow, like completing something she started. Maybe that's how love works, Clara suggested. It doesn't end with death. It ripples outward, touching lives, inspiring others to care and help and love in turn. When did you get so wise? Wyatt asked, but his tone was warm with affection. Probably somewhere between the broken arm and the patched roof, Clara replied, making him laugh despite the day's exhaustion. Word of their help to the Hendricks family spread, as everything did in Bridle Pass, but this time, the gossip was entirely positive. Clara found herself truly accepted not just as Wyatt's wife, but as a vital part of the community fabric. Women sought her out not just for sewing now, but for advice, for medical help with their children, for the simple comfort of talking to someone who listened without judgment. Men tipped their hats with genuine respect, even Mrs. Abernathy unbent enough to compliment Clara's handling of Lucy's injury. Spring arrived slowly, reluctantly, winter giving ground inch by muddy inch, but finally, the snow melted, revealing the green promise underneath. It was time for new beginnings in more ways than one. Clara had suspected for several weeks, but waited until she was certain. She told Wyatt on a morning when the first wildflowers were pushing through the earth, when the world itself seemed to be celebrating renewal. We're going to have a baby, she said simply, watching his face transform from confusion to understanding to joy. A baby, he repeated, as if the words were foreign. Then, louder. A baby. He swept her into his arms, spinning her around right there in the kitchen while Chen rolled his eyes and muttered about folks acting like children themselves. Careful, Clara laughed. I'm not fragile, but let's not take chances. Wyatt set her down gently, his hands framing her face. Are you happy about this? Happier than I ever imagined I could be. I thought, he swallowed hard. I thought this part of my life was over. The chance for children, for raising a family. Clara, you've given me back my future. We've given each other the future, she corrected. That's what partners do. The pregnancy progressed well, though Clara had to adjust to Wyatt's sudden protectiveness. He tried to forbid her from riding, from lifting anything heavier than a teacup, from basically living her life. I'm pregnant, not made of spun glass, she told him firmly after he'd tried to prevent her from gardening. Women have been having babies while running households since the beginning of time. Not my woman, he countered. Not my baby. They compromised, as they'd learned to do. Clara continued her work, but accepted help with the heavier tasks. She rode in the wagon instead of on horseback. She let Wyatt fuss over her in the evenings. Understanding his care came from love and lingering fear of loss. Rebecca proved a godsend during this time, visiting often with advice and assistance. Margaret always wanted children. She confided one afternoon as they sewed baby clothes together. She'd be so happy knowing this house would hear children's laughter again. I hope we're blessed with a daughter, Clara said. I'd like to name her Margaret. If Wyatt agrees, it seems right, honoring the past while embracing the future. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. She would love that, and I know Wyatt will too. As summer ripened into autumn, Clara grew round with promise. The ranch thrived under their joint management, Wyatt handling the livestock and hands, Clara managing the household and books with growing skill. They worked together on plans for expansion, for improvements, for the future they were building day by day. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold, Clara felt the baby move strongly. Here, she said, placing Wyatt's hand on her belly. Feel that that's your son or daughter saying hello. Wyatt's face filled with wonder as he felt the movement. Hello to you too, little one, he whispered. Your mom and I can't wait to meet you. Are you ever afraid? Clara asked suddenly. That something will go wrong, that we're too happy. Every day, Wyatt admitted. But I've learned fear is just love wearing work clothes. We can't let it stop us from living, from hoping, from building something worth having. He kissed her softly. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. That's what you taught me. Courage isn't not being afraid. It's being afraid and choosing love anyway. As if in agreement, the baby kicked again, strong and sure. Clara laughed, the sound carrying across the ranch like a blessing. I think this little one agrees, she said. They sat together as stars began to appear, hands linked over the promise of new life, hearts full of gratitude for second chances and the courage to take them. The ranch spread before them their land, their home, their future written in every fence post and flower bed. I love you, Mrs. Langston, Wyatt murmured. Thank you for being brave enough to dance with me. Thank you for being brave enough to ask. Clara replied, and for keeping your promise. What promise? To never let go. His arms tightened around her, careful of her changing body but firm with commitment. Never, he agreed. Not in this life or any other. As the night deepened and they finally went inside, Clara paused at the door to look back at the star-filled sky. Somewhere up there, she thought. Her mother watched and approved. Somewhere. Margaret smiled at the love continuing in her absence. And here on earth, in a ranch house that had known both sorrow and joy, Two people who'd thought their chances at happiness were over had found the courage to prove otherwise. Life would bring challenges, it always did. The baby would arrive squalling into a world that could be harsh and unforgiving. There would be droughts and storms, losses and fears. But there would also be love, laughter, the satisfaction of work shared and burdens halved. There would be the miracle of small hands reaching up, first words spoken, a family growing where once there had been only loneliness. "Coming to bed," Wyatt called from inside. "Just a moment," Clara replied, taking one last breath of the night air that smelled of sage and possibility. Then she turned and walked inside, ready for whatever tomorrow would bring, secure in the knowledge that she wouldn't face it alone, in the warmth of their home, in the circle of her husband's arms, in the promise of the life growing within her. Clara Langston had found her place at last, and it was exactly where she belonged. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope Clara and Wyatt's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine while sharing it. I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from. Please leave a comment below, and let's connect over our shared love of these frontier tales. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to Wild West Stories 1850 and hitting that like button. And if you really want to help more people discover these historical romances, please click the hype button to boost this video. Your support means everything and helps keep these stories alive. Until next time, partners.